A Triple Crown winner losing by one single point. Two players tying for the exact same award for the only time in the sport's history. A home run record breaker finishing runner-up to a player who hit 4 fewer bombs than he did. The MVP has produced more genuinely bizarre outcomes than any other award in the sport, because unlike Cy Young or Rookie of the Year, nobody has ever agreed on what valuable is actually supposed to measure. These aren't obscure footnotes either. Every one of the 6 seasons on this list involves at least one Hall of Famer, several involve multiple, and most of them are still argued about by fans decades after the actual votes were counted. The award's own vagueness is exactly what makes each of these 6 stories possible. A clearer, more mechanical definition of valuable would have prevented most of what's about to happen on this list from ever becoming a controversy in the first place. 6 seasons, 6 completely different ways the vote went sideways. Let's go through all 6. 1947, the 1-point snub. Start with the closest MVP vote in American League history. In 1947, Ted Williams won the Triple Crown outright, batting .343 with 32 home runs and 114 RBI, numbers that towered over Yankees center fielder Joe DiMaggio's .315, 20, and 97 in the same 3 categories that same season. And Williams still lost by a single point, 202 to 201, because DiMaggio's Yankees won the pennant while Williams' Red Sox finished 3rd. At the time, the mathematics of it barely made sense to anyone examining the raw numbers side by side. Williams didn't just edge DiMaggio in the Triple Crown categories, he led him comfortably in essentially every offensive measure available that season, including runs scored, total bases, and both on-base and slugging percentage. By any purely statistical reading, it wasn't a close race at all. The ballot count somehow was. The detail that turned the loss into a genuine scandal came out afterward. Of the 24 writers casting ballots, 1 left Williams off his ballot entirely, not even giving him a 10th place vote. That writer, a Boston columnist who by most accounts simply disliked Williams personally, denied him even the bare minimum recognition a Triple Crown season should have guaranteed. A single 10th place vote from that one ballot would have flipped the entire result. Williams, by his own account, wanted that award more than almost anything in his career, and lost it to a margin smaller than a rounding error, seemingly over a personal grudge that had nothing to do with baseball at all. The strangest coda to the whole episode is that Williams had already lost a nearly identical race to the same rival 6 years earlier, in 1941, the year he hit .406 for the season, a batting average no player has matched since, and still finished second to DiMaggio, whose 56-game hitting streak that same summer captured the public imagination in a way a decimal point batting average simply couldn't compete with. Twice in one decade, the same 2 Hall of Famers went head-to-head for the award, and twice, DiMaggio's team success and narrative appeal edged out a Williams season that, by the raw numbers alone, had no real peer in either year. 1960, the home run race that wasn't even the story yet. A decade later, the same franchise produced a different kind of controversy entirely. Roger Maris won the 1960 AL MVP over his own teammate Mickey Mantle by a margin of just 3 points, 225 to 222, one of the closest MVP votes ever recorded. And this was before either player had become synonymous with the more famous home run chase the following season. Mantle actually out-homered Maris that year and posted stronger numbers by most traditional measures. But Maris's reputation as the steadier, more complete all-around player carried enough weight with voters to close the gap. It's a rare case on this list where two Hall of Famers on the exact same roster genuinely split the vote almost down the middle, rather than one candidate clearly dominating the ballot. Every marginal factor imaginable, clutch hitting reputation, perceived leadership, even which of the two players the traveling press corps simply got along with better that particular season, carried real weight in a race decided by a margin small enough that any one of those soft factors could have flipped the outcome entirely. What makes this one sting in hindsight is what happened 1 year later. Maris beat Mantle again for the individual home run record in 1961, with the far more famous M&M Boys chase overshadowing this earlier, tighter vote almost entirely. Baseball history remembers 1961 as the iconic Maris-Mantle showdown. Almost nobody remembers that the two of them had already fought a near-identical battle for the actual MVP award a full season earlier, with an even narrower margin separating them. Both men were teammates on the same roster, chasing the same trophy in a city that had already crowned Yankees the league's best player more often than any other franchise. The 1960 vote essentially previewed every argument that would define the far more famous 1961 season. Which player's numbers were more impressive on paper, which player the New York press corps personally preferred, and which player's public image made for a better story heading into the offseason. The award itself barely registers as a footnote today, entirely eclipsed by what the same two men would do to each other's legacies 12 months later. 1979, the only tie in MVP history. For the only time in the history of the National League MVP award, two players tied outright. Keith Hernandez of the Cardinals led the league in batting average, doubles, and runs scored, and by nearly every offensive measure had the stronger individual season. Willie Stargell of the Pirates put up comparatively modest regular season numbers, but served as the emotional and leadership core of a Pirates team that won the division, swept through the league championship series, and then won the World Series, with Stargell himself named MVP of both of those postseason rounds as well. The two candidates couldn't have represented the two philosophies on this list more cleanly if the voting body had designed the race on purpose. Hernandez was the better player by the numbers, full stop, on a team that finished a distant third in its own division. Stargell was the inferior hitter that regular season by nearly every offensive category, but the unquestioned emotional anchor of a World Series champion. Rather than pick a side, the voting body's math simply refused to choose. When the ballots were tallied, Hernandez had 10 first-place votes to Stargell's 4, but the two of them finished dead even at 216 points apiece, the only tie in the modern history. It's the single clearest real-world example of the best player versus most valuable player argument playing out exactly as written. One writer even noted afterward that the entire voting process lacked any clear definition of what the award was even supposed to be measuring, which is part of why a genuine tie was even mathematically possible in the first place. The path to that tie was stranger than most fans remember too. 8 different players received at least one first-place vote that year, an unusually wide spread for a race that came down to just 2 names in the final tally. And several of those stray votes went to players on teams that were never realistically in playoff contention at all. A single one of those scattered first-place votes cast for someone entirely outside the real conversation is the specific reason the two frontrunners ended up dead even instead of one of them winning outright, meaning the only tie in MVP history exists almost by accident, a byproduct of ballot noise rather than genuine equal merit. 1998, the home run record that didn't win MVP. 1998 produced the most famous home run chase in the sport's history, and the man who actually broke the record didn't even win his league's MVP award that year. Mark McGwire hit 70 home runs, the most anyone had ever hit in a single season at that point, while also leading the league in slugging percentage and on-base percentage by a wide margin. Sammy Sosa hit 66, 4 fewer, but his Cubs claimed a playoff spot while McGwire's Cardinals finished a distant third in their division. And Sosa won the MVP comfortably. The entire country had spent the summer treating this as a genuine two-man race for the ages, with both players tracked on the evening news and compared at-bat by at-bat all season long. By the time the actual MVP ballots were counted that November, the record chase itself had already been settled for months. The award vote, in a strange way, felt almost anticlimactic by comparison. The real drama, as far as most fans were concerned, had already happened on the field back in September. By nearly every advanced measure calculated afterward, including the more sophisticated version of wins above replacement, McGwire's season was the stronger one, not merely a close call. It's one of the clearest documented cases of the team's success bias overriding a statistically superior individual season. And it happened in the same year the entire sport was obsessing in real time over which of the two sluggers was actually the better hitter that summer. What makes the vote especially striking in hindsight is how lopsided the actual ballot ended up, despite how close the underlying numbers were. Sosa won close to unanimously, even though McGwire out-homered him by 4, outslugged him by more than 100 points, and drew nearly 60 more walks over the course of the season, a gap in on-base skill wide enough that some analysts consider it the single most decisive statistical edge either slugger held over the other that year. The voting body simply weighted team success and the more traditional counting categories so heavily that McGwire's clear advantage in nearly every other measurable category barely moved the needle. 1998, the other league's snub. The very same season produced a second, quieter controversy in the American League. Texas outfielder Juan Gonzalez won the MVP with 47 home runs and 144 RBI, edging out Seattle's Alex Rodriguez and Ken Griffey Jr. in the voting. But both Rodriguez and Griffey posted higher wins above replacement than Gonzalez that year, with Griffey actually out-homering him, and neither ever fully closed the gap in the official vote count. The final tally itself was genuinely tight at the top, with Gonzalez edging Rodriguez by only a single first-place vote, while Griffey, despite matching or exceeding both of them by several statistical measures, finished a distant fourth, receiving barely a handful of first-place votes at all. It's a reminder that this fault line doesn't always produce a landslide the way the more famous 1998 race across town in the National League did. Sometimes the traditional stats candidate barely survives, and the more complete measure of value both finish behind a very good but statistically inferior season, purely because the counting stats voters leaned on at the time didn't capture defense, base running, or on-base skill the way the eventual advanced metrics would. The quieter nature of this particular snub is itself part of the story. Nobody outside the most dedicated corners of the sport spent much energy debating the American League MVP race that November because the entire country's attention was locked onto a single number climbing toward a milestone 3 time zones away. It's a reminder that a genuinely debatable MVP outcome doesn't need a national spotlight to happen. It can occur quietly, in the shadow of a much louder story, and still sit just as unresolved decades later once the numbers finally catch up to it. 2012, the Triple Crown versus the Analytics Era. Finally, the modern version of the exact same argument decades later, with the numbers finally sophisticated enough to measure it directly. Miguel Cabrera won the American League's first Triple Crown in 45 years in 2012, leading the league in batting average, home runs, and RBI simultaneously, a feat so rare that every single player to ever accomplish it before him is in the Hall of Fame. Rookie center fielder Mike Trout, by contrast, led the league in stolen bases and runs scored, played elite defense at a premium position, and posted a wins above replacement total roughly 3 full wins higher than Cabrera's by the more generous calculation. This is the one case on the list where both candidates were, by any reasonable measure, having a genuinely historic season at the exact same time, which is precisely what made the debate so combustible in real time. Nobody was arguing that Cabrera had a bad year in order to make the case for Trout. The entire fight was over how to weigh two legitimately extraordinary but fundamentally different kinds of greatness against each other on the exact same ballot. The vote wasn't close. Cabrera won by a wide margin, more first-place votes than anyone expected, in what became the loudest public referendum yet on whether the sport's newer analytical tools should outweigh a feat as rare and traditionally sacred as the Triple Crown. It's the same fault line from 1947, 1979, and 1998, playing out one more time with far more sophisticated numbers on the table, and ultimately, the exact same traditional answer winning out anyway. What separates this case from the earlier ones on the list is how publicly the debate itself was fought, in real time, before the vote was even cast. Sabermetrically inclined writers spent the entire final month of the season openly campaigning for Trout in national outlets, armed with a statistic that simply hadn't existed in any of the earlier controversies on this list. It made no difference to the final tally. Traditional narrative and the rarity of the Triple Crown carried the vote by a wide margin. Proof that better information doesn't automatically settle an argument the award's own definition was never built to resolve in the first place. 6 seasons, 6 completely different ways the vote broke down, and the same handful of unresolved questions underneath every single one of them. Does team success matter more than individual numbers? Do the newer stats deserve more weight than the old ones? And can a single voter's personal grudge or a split ballot quietly decide who gets remembered as the best player in the league that year? The MVP has never actually settled any of those questions. It just keeps handing them to a new jury every single October and asking them to decide all over again. Look closely at the 6 seasons on this list, and a pattern emerges that's almost uncomfortable to sit with. The traditional answer wins far more often than the statistically superior one does. DiMaggio over Williams, Maris over Mantle, Sosa over McGwire, Gonzalez over Rodriguez and Griffey, Cabrera over Trout. Only the 1979 Tide genuinely split the difference. 5 separate decades, 5 different generations of voters, and the same basic instinct kept winning out. Team success, narrative, and the numbers everyone already understood over the player who was, by nearly every deeper measure available at the time, actually having the better individual season. That pattern says less about any single voter's individual bias and more about how the award itself was constructed from the very beginning. A trophy whose entire definition was left deliberately vague was always going to reward the more comfortable, more familiar story over the more mathematically defensible one, in year after year, decade after decade, regardless of which specific writers happen to be holding the ballots that particular November. Thanks for making it through all 6. If one of these finally explains an old argument you've heard your whole life, drop a like and subscribe. It genuinely helps the channel keep making these. And if you're into the mechanics behind the moments everyone remembers, go check out our last one, Every Walk-Off Explained, and the one ending that doesn't even need a swing.